Okay, so let's talk about the financial contagion. And let me know if I'm overthinking this, but don't you think it's interesting how the terms used to depict certain things are chosen? The intentional collapse of the global financial system. Well, it's a financial contagion. Now I know the term financial contagion first came onto the scene back in 1997. However, it's the same as how marketing departments choose things like color schemes to evoke certain emotions. It's the same deal. Instead of selling you a product though, this time they are selling you fear. So the reason I find that to be interesting is because this association is intrinsically made by the public when they hear that term, contagion. A specific set of emotions can be evoked with the use of that term. This is especially true after COVID. It's the little things, the linguistic manipulations. It's just always been interesting to me to see how they manipulate people. And this is how they do it. So the other day I heard another one, and this has quickly become one of my new favorite political euphemisms. So after 2008, bailouts have been deemed as a public relations nightmare. So instead, they now call it a bank rescue plan. So on the one hand, you have a bank bailout, and on the other hand, you have a rescue plan. A rescue plan does have a much better ring to it, doesn't it? Anyway, let's try to make some sense out of what's happening. One thing that keeps coming to mind is the fact that serious economic issues, similar to the ones we are facing right now, typically precludes war. Yes, the Uniparty and their followers are all in on the war front. And so to this end, let's check out some new developments. 2.5 tons of uranium goes missing in war-torn Libya, prompting nuclear security fears. And so they say that American officials are worried that Iran could try to purchase that stolen uranium. And as it turns out, this was actually something that was disclosed in a diplomatic cable released by WikiLeaks back in 2009. It showed that Gaddafi's top nuclear official tried to warn the US about this possibility. And I cannot help myself, I gotta make this connection. It popped into my head as soon as I read that. Isn't it interesting that we may get a new reason to invade Iran right after we get a story like this? And I quote, Iran just discovered the world's second largest lithium reserve on the planet, which of course is a crucial resource for the green revolution. Just an interesting connection. Interesting timing, don't you think? But hey, it could just mean that rebel nukes will be launched in the future. Who knows? Either option is pretty bad. So let's get into some more war news linked to the financial system. The biggest story in the world right now, or what should be one of the biggest stories, is that China is brokering a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. This can only mean one thing, that the world is unipolar no more. Or, well, I guess you could say that the fracture is getting bigger. The US dollar's reserve currency status is being challenged in ways that few understand, and this will lead to warring economic systems. And so, when these two economic systems clash, is it a stretch for me to assume that war is right around the corner? I don't think so. The fact remains that the groundwork has been laid, the threats have been made, and if they pull the trigger and shift to selling their oil in yen, well, that means that the war is on. As stated, I believe that the US banks collapsing, the push for a central bank digital currency, the BRIC financial system rising, and now the Saudi Arabia news. Well, damn, I believe that war is on the horizon. It will be a war for control of the technocratic system, and with it, the ability to control the new economic order. Now, there are a few more signs that point to this. As we speak, the Pentagon is maxing out production lines for munitions, as the US must have it to prevail over aggression in the Indo-Pacific theater. And what that means is war with China. And on top of that, China, Russia, and Iran are teaming up for joint military drills in the Gulf of Oman. And on top of that, the ICC issued a warrant for Putin's arrest over war crimes. And really, the argument isn't even whether or not war crimes have been committed, because I'm pretty sure they have. However, the point is, if you're looking for a diplomatic resolution and to end the war, this is not the way to do it. They are not giving him an out. The only options that Putin has now are to either press forward with the war or get tried for war crimes, and typically, if convicted, that means death. And so, that ultimately means exactly what NATO and the US have been saying, that they are going to see this through to the end. There is no peaceful resolution coming. It is war that they want, it is war that they are after, and it is war that they will get. Now, to add on top of all of that, China is heading to meet with Russia sometime next week, and Ukraine, I do believe. As we talked about this many times, I think everyone is just still in this, a sort of preparation stage. This is not about Ukraine though. It's about something much, much bigger. Economic control of the future. And so, okay, while we prepare to move on to the next section of the video, the collapse of the banking system. Well, this is new to me, but did you know that they give out awards for central banking? And guess who won Central Bank of the Year? Of course, it was Ukraine. It's almost as if there's a correlation between the two stories, Ukraine winning Central Bank of the Year and the collapse of the US financial sector. So there's been a lot of talk about what's going on with the banks, and really, I can't personally go into it too much. I mean, I know a little bit about economics, but not enough to confidently give you some insight. However, let me highlight some things that others have said that I believe may help us understand things a little bit better. So, and I quote, Silicon Valley Bank did not fail because of loan defaults. It failed because of rapidly rising interest rates collapsed the value of its long-term bond portfolio. The original sin of this banking crisis was the government crushing the bond market with near zero rates and recklessly printing trillions and trillions of dollars. That was a very, very bad idea. The bill is coming due, end of quote. And so for some reason, no one really thought through the COVID money printing. Well, the average citizen didn't, but the ones who were running things did. This is all by design. However, as we talked about in the last video, the entire global financial system has been propped up on voodoo economics ever since 2008. I got a clip here for you to watch from 2013, and they are describing why it's all a scam.
I rise again, I'm afraid, to make the same old hoary speech that I've been making here for several years, and that is, it is my opinion that you do not really understand the concept of banking. All the banks are broke. Bank Santander, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, they're all broke. And why are they broke? It isn't an act of God. It isn't some sort of tsunami. They're broke because we have a system called fractional reserve banking, which means that banks can lend money that they don't actually have. It's a criminal scandal, and it's been going on for too long. To add to that problem, you have moral hazard, a very significant moral hazard from the political sphere. And most of the problem starts in politics and central banks, which are part of the same political system. We have counterfeiting, sometimes called quantitative easing, but counterfeiting by any other name. The artificial printing of money, which if any ordinary person did, they'd go to prison for a very long time. And yet governments and central banks do it all the time. Central banks repress the amount of interest that rates are, so we don't have the real cost of money, and yet we blame the real retail banks for manipulating LIBOR. The sheer effrontery of this is quite astonishing. It's central banks that manipulate interest rates, Commissioner. And plus, underneath all this, we talk loosely, in a rather cavalier fashion, do we not, about deposit guarantees. So when banks go broke through their own incompetence and chicanery, the taxpayer picks up the tab. It's theft from the taxpayer. And until we start sending bankers, and I include central bankers and politicians, to prison for this outrage, it will continue.
So, okay, here's a few things I've been thinking about. I think that all the chaos points to the fact that there is something more going on beneath the surface. For example, one thing that must take place before they can move forward with their technocratic system is bank consolidation. Now, one of the biggest indicators that this is really about the consolidation of banks and pushing this central bank digital currency comes down to a few things. So, is it a coincidence that the banks hit were heavily into the crypto market? Maybe. Is it a coincidence that guys like Peter Thiel were calling their buddies and telling them, hey, you should get your cash out of this particular bank, and this happens right before the collapse? I don't think so. Now, what about the people who were actually running the bank who cashed out their stocks right before the collapse? Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Is it a coincidence that by issuing these protections on deposits only for larger banks that, as they say, pose a systemic risk to the system, well, is it a coincidence that as a result of this, we'll see small banks flooding deposits to larger banks? And that's because the government will not extend the same protections to those smaller banks. Again, I don't think that's a coincidence. The federal government and the banking elites are trying to force Americans out of their credit union or community bank and into these, a mega bank type of deal. But why would they do that? Well, the thing is that a lot of people believe that it's to centralize held currency into their preferred institutions, because this would make the transition to a monitored digital currency much easier. And at a certain point, it all becomes predictable. Consolidations within the banking system will be a massive red flag though. So that is something that we should probably keep an eye on. So, over the next few years, we could see a dramatic reduction to about 20 or 30 large banks in the US, down from thousands. The current deposit insurance policy makes small community banks unviable, which of course would be all a part of the plan. And so, all the moves that are being made right now have multiple aspects to it, and each of these new proposals help their agenda immensely. Even a US congressman said, and I quote, "The current administration is weaponizing the market chaos to kill crypto," end of quote. So yeah, basically, from all of this chaos, they could kill crypto, consolidate the banks, and begin issuing exchanges from US fiat to US digital dollars. All of those dominoes are initiated through policy changes being made right now and through the collapse of the banks. All they have to do is tip over that first domino and then push into place the new policy. However, what's another solution that they have? Well, check this out. The Fed just printed $300 billion out of thin air last week to bail out the banks. However, the thing is that they're not done. They want to inject $2 trillion into the financial system. And so, what do you think that's going to do to the value of the dollar? Am I missing something? I don't think so, but yeah, apparently the plan seems to be debase the currency, collapse the banks, hurt the crypto market, consolidate the banks, and then finally institute the central bank digital currency. As I said, they just have to knock down that first domino, and they already did. And so basically Janet Yellen just said that the government essentially federalized the deposit base. They guaranteed all deposits in the US. They nationalized the financial system. That's a pretty big deal. Now we do have a clip here, and it's, no matter who it is, I'm always surprised when the legacy media talks about this particular aspect.
What we know is the Biden administration is backstopping these deposits. Okay. But that's not the end of the story. In some ways, it's the beginning. So here's the part where you pause and ask yourself a question that too few seem to be considering right now. They're doing this. What are they going to get in return? Oh, something, for sure. Remember that after 2008, the Obama administration, Eric Holder, swooped in and imposed DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion standards on the entire financial sector. And that's one of the main reasons our big banks are now increasingly incompetent, and also one of the reasons Americans are so divided by race. Ideologues used the 2008 bank bailout to kill American meritocracy. That's a big step, mostly unacknowledged, but we're living with its consequences. So you have to ask yourself, what are they going to do this time? Well, we know we're about to see bank consolidation, big banks eating little banks, and that means less competition. More consolidation means more government control. So what are they going to do with that control? Well, all things being equal, if people don't start making a lot of noise and exerting an awful lot of pressure, it'll mean digital currency, a currency that politicians control. Sign up for the CBDC app to get your food stamps. You think that's not coming? Of course it's coming. They'd like it to come in any case. Now, we're not alleging a conspiracy here, but we did notice that the four biggest banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Chase, are doing well. And we also noticed that the White House appears to be, maybe we're just reading into this too much, trying to induce runs on regional banks. They seem to be trying to take away your confidence in those banks. Here's Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, not someone we'd ever accuse of having an original thought, but she's a vessel for the plans of others. Here she is on Friday as SVB was collapsing. Now, she doesn't say a word about the fundamentals of the market or the security of your money in banks. Instead, she talks about the one thing that matters to her, which is the racial identity of the people in charge of our finance system. Watch.
I do want to take a moment to note the historic nature of the moment that you see in front of you right now. All three of us are historic first in our roles. The first Black woman to serve as CEA chair, OMB director, White House press secretary. The first Black women right in front of you for all of those three important key roles in the administration.
These people lack all self-awareness, as if anyone would care. Why should we care? Is there some reason to care? And by the way, you are discrediting by your stupidity and clear incompetence anything you're promoting. You should keep that in mind. But big picture, if you wanted to make people less confident in regional banks and the banking system more broadly, if you wanted to maybe induce a run on the banks, this might be how you talk. Oh, we're all of a certain racial group. Huh? What does it have to do with whether the banks have enough cash in reserve to cover their balance sheets? So what we do know is that the Democratic Party, the Biden administration, sees this crisis as a means of expanding their control. And we know this because in a recent Zoom call with the Fed, Treasury Department, and other financial regulators with members of Congress. Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona asked whether there was a program in place to censor social media posts that could lead to a national run on banks. Now, that's according to Congressman Thomas Massey. Michael Schellenberger has a great piece on this today. Massey was on the call. So think about this for a second. You've got a deposit at a regional bank that's holding tons, way more than you know, of long-term treasuries that are worth a lot less than they were when the bank bought them. That means that bank is at risk. That means your money's at risk. But Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona doesn't want you to know about that. Why wouldn't they want you to know that? Kind of interesting. That kind of censorship could actually crush people.
And so, yeah, Tucker Carlson said that we're about to see bank consolidation, which means more government control. That also means a digital currency, a currency that politicians control. You think that's not coming? Of course, it's coming. End of quote. And yeah, I agree. And so, is it all a part of a bigger plan? A question that we have to ask ourselves quite a bit. Personally, I kind of think it's a never let a good crisis go to waste type of situation. And the reason I say that is because Silicon Valley Bank was run by morons. They were incredibly irresponsible and were too caught up with their social agenda to actually do their jobs. They were making skits, musicals, they gave Black Lives Matter $73 million and changed their business practices to achieve net zero emissions. They even made sure to have diversity officers, but no risk management officer. So yeah, good decisions. Anyway, they were all in on the ESG ratings, the whole nine. Which again, I suppose could be attributed to the global plan, actually. As, of course, all those policies have been handed down from above, from the UN and the World Economic Forum. So I guess we've come full circle anyway. And so yes, I do have to assume that this is a part of the plan. Anyway, even if it was just them being idiots, let's just assume that their ideologically driven agenda overcame critical thinking. They fell victim to the cult. Well, once the establishment noticed that those first dominoes were falling, could they have just pounced and used it to push their real agenda? Maybe. It's all about control over the new economy. Really though, I guess we do have to wait to see how this plays out. It could take a while. But there are some big red flags to be on the lookout for. And that would be bank consolidation. That would signal to us that there is more to this than meets the eye. And so, in regards to this, is it a coincidence that the Trilateral Commission has declared that 2023 would be the beginning of a new economic order? It's just a coincidence that these economic woes, the banking system collapsing, all of this happens right at this particular moment in time when they have actually been planning an economic transition. Is it a coincidence? I doubt it. Anyway, and I quote from Patrick Wood, "The Trilateral Commission's 50th anniversary marks the culmination of its self-proclaimed new international economic order. And so on March 12th, the Trilateral Commission held a meeting in India. The meeting was regarding issues related to globalization. The Trilateral Commission's and Brzezinski's technocratic era has apparently officially arrived." So, as we talked about, amid the New World alliances that are forming as India and China seek to normalize relations, and as China just brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the globalist narrative has opened a new and possibly final chapter. At the meeting, one individual said, and I quote, "3 decades of globalization, defined as integrated, free market-based, and deflationary, has been replaced by what will be a multi-decade period of globalization defined as fragmented, not free market-based, but industrial policy-based and structurally inflationary. This year, 2023, is year one of this new global order." End of quote. And so this actually does reflect what Brzezinski's strategy was to transform the world. He wrote about this in the book called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technocratic Era. And I quote, "The nation-state as a fundamental unit of man's organized life has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation-state." End of quote. So yeah, basically corporatism and your sovereignty doesn't mean shit. Welcome to the new global order. So, as we know, Klaus Schwab said this back in 2020, and I quote, "The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world." End of quote. And so, if you've been following my videos for a while, we've talked about this quite a bit. The so-called pandemic was a technocracy's coup d'etat that has been building up for over 45 years at the hands of the Trilateral Commission. In fact, I have argued consistently that the Commission's original, and I quote, new international economic order was simply nothing more than technocracy warmed over from the 1930s. It was Brzezinski's technocratic era. It's also known as the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, or more commonly known as the SDGs. It's also Biden's Green New Deal. It's all one and the same, and it's all strategized by members of the Trilateral Commission starting back in 1973. The World Economic Forum is thoroughly intertwined with the UN. On the World Economic Forum website, it says, and I quote, the COVID-19 pandemic has presented its fair share of challenges, but has also offered opportunities. So when Klaus Schwab says that the World Economic Forum is quote-unquote reimagining the future, he is flatly misleading or lying. This future was already imagined by early members of the Trilateral Commission, such as Brzezinski, David Rockefeller, Richard Gardner, and Henry Kissinger, all founding members of the Trilateral Commission, and as we know, the mentor to Klaus Schwab. Now, just to get an idea of how widespread this agenda is, and I quote from the World Economic Forum website, to achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions. Every country, from the United States to China, must participate, and every industry from oil and gas to tech must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism, end of quote. So now as the Trilateral Commission, who is acting as the quarterback for this team of tyrants, has relayed the call to the World Economic Forum that, and I quote one more time, this year, 2023, is year one of this new global order, end of quote. And so, what does this mean for 2023, and what does this mean for us? Well, as we've talked about many times, we are already experiencing a quote-unquote polycrisis of doom, where multiple crises are descending upon us all at the same time. So first, we have this energy crisis that, of course, is man-made. So from there, we have a food crisis, which, of course, is also man-made. They are attacking all traditional food systems. We have a financial crisis that also is man-made and threatens total collapse of the existing financial system. And then, of course, we have the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine that threatens World War III, also a man-made conflict. And really, any one of these pending crises could be seen as some sort of scorched earth policy, where total destruction is possible down to the ground level. And so consider this, if all four are unleashed on us at the same time, well, wouldn't that be the equivalent of atomic warfare resulting in a literal quote-unquote dark winter? And so to end the video, I ask you to consider this. A world in freefall, a collapsed world, would be ripe for total capture and rebuilding into technocracy's dystopia. All of these crises are perfect for their agenda. And so once again, that leaves us with the question, is it all a plan? I believe it is. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.